Good afternoon. On behalf of the Vice-Chancellor and Principal, Professor Nanu Poku, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor Shaun Ruggunan. The Vice-Chancellor conveys his congratulations and best wishes to Professor Ruggunan. The Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Professor Manage Reddy, conveys her apologies and wishes Professor Ruggunan all the best, thanking him for his contributions to the School of Management, IT and Governance. I would like to acknowledge the following guests this afternoon: members of Council, members of the Executive Management Committee, members of Senate, our inaugurand, Professor Shaun Ruggunan, family and friends of Professor Ruggunan, academics and professional staff, students, alumni and distinguished guests. A special welcome to our guests from universities and organizations within South Africa, the African continent, and across the globe. A short background to inaugural lectures at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. These lectures form part of our university's public lecture series and may only be presented to newly appointed full professors who have been appointed by newly appointed full professors who have been appointed in academic schools and centers. Inaugural lectures present an opportunity for showcasing the exciting and groundbreaking research and teaching being carried out by professors in our university. Each lecture represents a significant milestone in an academic's career, providing official recognition of their promotion or appointment to full professorship. These lectures are furthermore an ideal opportunity for new professors to introduce themselves and to present an overview of their own contribution and journey within their field to academic peers, students, and research collaborators. Inaugural lectures are also a platform for celebrating a professor's academic achievements with his or her family, friends, mentors, and colleagues. Distinguished guests, it is my pleasure to now introduce the Dean and Head of School of Management, IT and Governance, Professor Stephen Matsula, who will now formally introduce our inaugurand, Professor Shaun Ruggunan.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my singular honor and privilege to now introduce Professor Shaun Ruggunan, who is a full professor in the discipline of Human Resources Management and Industrial Relations in the College of Law and Management Studies at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and is based in Durban, South Africa. Professor Ruggunan received his BA with majors in Psychology and Industrial Organizational and Labor Studies in 1998. Subsequently, he received an honors degree in Industrial, Organizational and Labor Studies from the University of Natal in the year 2000. He then obtained an MA cum laude in Industrial Organization and Labor Studies in the year 2002 from the University of Natal, and a PhD in Industrial, Organizational and Labor Studies in 2009 from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. In the year 2024, he credentialed as an integral life and leadership coach from the University of Cape Town. His master's and doctoral work was funded by both the Mellon Foundation and the National Research Foundation, NRF, with both founders providing him scholarships for his research. Additionally, his doctoral work on the labor market for seafarers was funded by the International Transport Workers Federation, the German Academic Exchange Service DAD, and the Seafarer International Research Center at the University of Cardiff, Wales in the UK. Professor Ruggunan joined the Program for Industrial, Organizational and Labor Studies as a contract lecturer in the year 2000. He was subsequently appointed as lecturer in the year 2002 as part of the University of KwaZulu-Natal Leadership Equity Acceleration Program. In the year 2011, he joined the School of Management as a senior lecturer in the discipline of Human Resources Management and Industrial Relations. In 2016, he achieved the position of associate professor, and in 2022 was appointed to the position of full professor in the same school and discipline. Professor Ruggunan's research areas are multiple, but cohere around the following themes: seafaring, labor markets, the sociology of professions, and critical management studies. His work on seafaring labor markets was pioneering in both the African and global contexts. He demonstrated that global labor markets are shaped by perceptions of race, nationality, gender, and class, rather than only economic or rational indicators. At a time when capital was viewed as the only agent in shaping globalization, Professor Ruggunan showed that organized labor is a powerful shaper of global labor markets and essential in preventing race to the bottom for workers in global labor markets. He continues to work on seafarer mental health, diversity, inclusion, and equity in the maritime industry, and the ways in which seafarers have historically shaped trajectories of globalization. Together with Professor Debbie Bonin, Professor Ruggunan formalized the subdiscipline of sociology of professions within the larger scholarly corpus of sociology and human resources management research in South Africa. The third thematic focus of his research is on critical management studies, which draws on decolonial and critical social theory and its application to teaching and learning in the higher education context. Professor Ruggunan has successfully completed the supervision of 4 doctoral and 26 master's students. He has also mentored 2 postdoctoral fellows and published over 50 research outputs that include a variety of book chapters, conference proceedings, and journal articles in Scopus and ISI indexed journals. These include high-impact journals such as Organization, Human Resources for Health, and Maritime Management and Policy. In 2016, Professor Ruggunan published his first book, entitled Waves of Change, Globalization and Seafaring Labor Markets. The Human Sciences Research Council published book went on to be shortlisted for Best Scholarly Book at the National Institute of Social Science and Humanities Book Awards in 2017. This book is considered seminal reading for scholars in maritime human resources and industrial sociology by academics in the field. His second book, Management Studies in South Africa, exploring the trajectory in the apartheid era and beyond, was published by Palgrave in 2019 and is co-authored with Professor Radhamani Suryamuthi. This book continues to be cited by those with an interest in how disciplinary knowledge is constructed over time and maps out how management studies developed in South Africa within the context of colonialism, apartheid, and post-apartheid. Professor Ruggunan examines both master's and doctoral theses from national and global universities. He is an editorial board member of a number of journals, including Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, and has served as a guest editor for Organization South Africa Review of Sociology, and most recently, Journal of Industrial Relations. Professor Ruggunan has been an invited speaker at a number of international conferences and workshops in the United Kingdom, Canada, Sweden, the United States, Argentina, Australia, and the Philippines, including Ethiopia, among other countries. He has served as a visiting researcher at the Seafarer International Research Centre at the University of Cardiff, Wales, UK. He is also a visiting professor at the School of Labour and Industrial Relations at the University of the Philippines. The African Union in 2019 invited Professor Ruggunan to serve as an advisor on African Union maritime labour policy. In 2023, Professor Ruggunan's nomination to serve as an observer on the European Union's Research Commission on Maritime Profession, which sits in Brussels, Belgium, was approved by the South African Department of Trade and Industry. In 2024, Professor Ruggunan was the recipient of the World Expert Lecture Series grant from the University of the Philippines for his work on seafaring, labor market, and critical management studies. Given his work on the decolonizing management studies and critical management studies, Professor Ruggunan is regularly invited to speak on his philosophy of teaching and learning. Most notably, he has presented his ideas on this in keynotes, presentation, and workshops to both local, national, and global communities, such as the African Academy of Management, the Academy of Management in the United States, and Manchester Business School, among others. His article, Decolonizing Management Studies, a Love Story, published in 2016, is considered essential reading by scholars working in this area, both globally and nationally. Professor Ruggunan is consistently invited by the Academy of Management, the largest professional body of management scholars, to conduct teaching and learning workshops on critical management studies. The National Research Foundation has consistently awarded Professor Ruggunan a research rating since 2011. Initially rated as a Y researcher in 2011, he has retained a C2 rating since 2017. He serves on many NRF panels, including those for the appointment of research chairs. The NRF has, since the inception of his career, funded his work on seafaring, labor markets, and more recently, on critical management studies. He has raised over R1 million in funding for his students via various grants. Much of Professor Ruggunan's work consists of mentoring and counseling students and less experienced staff in how to navigate academia with resilience. He drew on his organizational psychology credentials during the pandemic to run a resilience webinar series in 2021 for the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He continues to formally coach and mentor academics as part of his commitment to ensuring good mental health in academia. I have therefore the privilege once again and honor to invite Professor Ruggunan to deliver his inaugural address entitled, "I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free, Emancipation in Management Studies." Over to you, Professor Ruggunan.
Good afternoon, colleagues, and a warm welcome to everyone. Welcome and good afternoon to Professor Poku, our Vice-Chancellor, the Registrar, Dr. Kathy Clearland, Professor Reddy, who's our Acting Deputy Vice-Chancellor, and Professor Colette Muller. An especially warm welcome to my Dean, Professor Mutula, who is our Head of School and Dean of the School of Management, IT and Governance, and the entire University of KwaZulu-Natal community. An especially warm and hearty welcome to my colleagues from my school, former students, current students, alumni, family, friends, and all of those who have taken the time to attend this inaugural lecture. my heartfelt thanks for your time and support. It gives me great joy to have people from all the different parts of my life come together to celebrate what for me is a collective achievement. I welcome you all to this inaugural lecture. For me, the achievement of full professorship is the outcome not only of my own work, but an acknowledgement of the rich and meaningful relationships and organizations that have supported me in and out of my career. In a world that does not value or reward the relational increasingly, it is the relational that I wish to celebrate today. The theme of my lecture is emancipation in management studies. In preparing for this lecture, I was trying to make thematic sense of my work as both a researcher and a teacher, looking for that golden thread to hold together the seemingly different areas and disparate areas of my work. The themes of freedom and emancipation kept emerging. This is not to say that my career thus far has consciously focused on these themes, but the idea of what it may mean to be free of macro and micro forms of oppression in workplaces, labor markets, and organizations have nonetheless emerged as core to my work in both the research field and the lecture room. At the heart of my work is the belief that the academic project, specifically in management studies, and my own subfield of human resources management should be one of emancipation. For Nina Simone, in one of her most popular songs, emancipation meant freedom, a freedom from racialized oppression. Decades after Nina Simone's song about wondering what it means to be free, the idea of emancipation continues to resonate both in popular and in scholarly culture. From artists to decolonial theorists, from popular singers to the academy, the idea of emancipation captures and spurs the imagination of what the possibilities are of projects that liberate humans at the micro and macro levels of our lives. The dance between structure and agency in discussions on emancipation continue to shape thinking of the concept. We can think of emancipation as the process through which individuals and groups become free from repressive social and ideological conditions, in particular those that place socially unnecessary restrictions upon the development and articulation of human consciousness. And I argue in my work that the interpellation or inclusion of emancipation in management studies as an academic discipline is in itself an act of resistance. Emancipation is aligned to the concepts of freedom and liberation. Freedom, like the idea of emancipation, refers to the condition where individuals or collectives mobilize their agency, extricating themselves from oppressive structural conditions. As a management studies scholar, I am concerned with the processes by which such freedoms are achieved in organizational, work-based, and labor market settings. These emancipatory processes are mostly the outcomes of active resistance by workers at the macro and micro levels. From Taylor's ideas of soldiering to Braverman's ideas of resistance and control, and more recent work on quiet quitting and quiet vacationing, the agency of workers to emancipate themselves from coercive or repressive organizational settings demonstrates the centrality of the concept to management studies. The micro and macro organizing principles of emancipation are aligned to structure agency debates. How much of emancipation occurs at the individual level is linked with a concern for people's lived experiences in seeking freedoms from oppressive bureaucratic structures of work organizations and/or labor markets. Work in this area runs the range from daydreaming in the workplace, developing anti-organization countercultures, and go-slows, all which occur as individual acts of resistance. Micro-emancipations can provide the impetus for larger collective acts of resistance and struggles. Examples of this would be collective bargaining and the ways in which labor organizes both nationally and globally. If micro-emancipation is about agency, then macro-emancipation is about structure. Macro-emancipation is concerned with the ways in which societal structures, political economy, state machinery, bureaucracies, and institutions configure society and confer restrictions on societies. Emancipation in this context requires individuals and societies to navigate their way through repressive structural conditions. For example, repressive legislation, organizational design, and repressive ideological beliefs of the state. The apartheid state in South Africa, for example, enacted structural conditions of oppression for Black South Africans. This translated into repressive workplace legislation, racialized labor market policies, and the erasing of Black people from the definition of worker. This erasure meant that Black people could not access any of the protections afforded by the country's labor laws, since they were never defined as workers in the first place. The emancipation of workers here meant the navigating and overthrowing of structural conditions of apartheid through collective organization of oppressed people. There are three main areas of my research and teaching that speak to the spirit of emancipation. First is my work on seafarers and globalization. Second is work on critical management studies. And third is my contribution to the sociology of professions. As such, my work is interdisciplinary, drawing on scholarship from management studies, sociology, and organizational psychology. In 1998, at the then University of Natal, I registered for an honors degree in industrial, organizational, and labor studies. This is an interdisciplinary program combining both industrial sociology and industrial organizational psychology. In this sense, my career was forged in interdisciplinary ways of knowing and navigating the world. If mainstream industrial psychology in the 1990s was about monitoring, measuring, and controlling workers, then industrial sociology was about questioning the structures of control embedded in political economy, as well as critiquing managerial techniques of exercising power. The tension between these disciplinary ideas would be formative in shaping both my research and teaching career. Studying and later working in the Center for Industrial, Organizational, and Labor Studies was exciting, not just from an academic perspective, but I also forged friendships and professional relationships that continue to exist today. To interact, work, and be mentored by great South African scholars such as Professor Ari Sitas, Professor Gerhard Marais, and Professor Debbie Bonnen, amongst other colleagues in IOLS, was a profound experience that has shaped much of my career. And I note that Ari is here today because I saw his message in the chat, and that is so special to me that we can connect again today. I wish to also acknowledge former IOLS colleagues, Dr. Catherine Pillay, Dr. Bianca Tain, Dr. Aisha Logat, Amanda Kinners, Adarsh Miraj, Professor Makong Mapadimeng, Dr. Sitembiso Bengu, Dr. Yvonne Erasmus, and Professor Nomkosi Kulu, all of whom have shaped so much of my career. It was during my tenure in IOLS that I would also meet and learn from eminent scholars like the late, great Professor Eddie Webster, Professor Sakela Bushlungu, Professor Johan Marie, and Professor Gillian Hart. They all have my gratitude. I knew at the time that I wanted to pursue a master's in IOLS, but the perennial issue of funding remained. It was then that an opportunity to have my studies funded by the International Transport Workers Federation and the NRF, or the National Research Foundation, occurred, with the proviso that I do my master's dissertation on seafaring labor markets and trade unions. Knowing nothing about seafarers or the shipping industry, but grateful for the opportunity to have my studies funded, I accepted the scholarships. Subsequent to graduating with my master's, I was employed in 2001 at the then University of Natal through its Leadership Equity Acceleration Program. And I wish to express my gratitude to Reena Badri, who was head of the LEAP program at the time, and the Mellon Foundation for their commitment to racial and gender transformation at the University of Natal. So in this photograph, if you look where the red arrows are pointing, you can see myself in the back and Reena in the front. I definitely had more hair then. Armed with the energy, courage, and hubris of youth, I embarked on the first fieldwork trip of my studies and research career in 1999. And it happened to be to the Philippines. Given that over a quarter of the world's seafarers are Filipino, if I was to study seafarers, then interviews with Filipino seafarers and stakeholders was essential. I remember boarding a Cathay Pacific flight from Johannesburg to Manila in a t-shirt, shorts, and sandals with a vague plan of how I was going to engage in fieldwork. I even think it was my first long-haul flight. Today, I would balk at the idea of doing something impromptu, something so impromptu. I was generously hosted by the Center for Third World Studies at the University of the Philippines, and it would be the beginning of a long and rewarding professional and personal relationship with colleagues and friends at the University of the Philippines. I would make return visits to the Philippines to conduct field work for my doctoral studies that examined the labor market for Filipino, South African, and British seafarers. Here you can see me, I think it was 1999, in Manila, the Philippines. Yeah, it was quite a moment for me. To then be invited as a visiting professor in September 2024 to the University of the Philippines as part of their World Expert Lecture Series was a humbling experience. To meet people that mentored me, befriended me, and contributed to my personal and professional growth was both an emotional and rewarding experience. To be able to interact with students and staff and share ideas in and off the Global South was inspiring. So this is me in 2024 in September this year, in the Philippines and at the University of the Philippines, attempting to negotiate a MOU between the UKZN and the University of the Philippines. And that's a poster of the 3 lectures that I gave as part of the World Expert Lecture Series. I gave lectures on my 3 areas of work: seafaring labor markets, critical management studies, and the sociology of professions. This was indeed a full circle moment. My work on globalization and seafarers would culminate in both my doctorate in 2009 and my first book published in 2016 called Waves of Change, Globalization and Seafarers. In this book, I highlight the complex, often poorly understood world of the global shipping industry that carries more than 90% of the world's trade by volume. I also made visible the work and organizing strategies of what is a mostly hidden seafaring labor market, despite seafarers being the backbone of the global economy. As one of the oldest global industries, I challenge the simplistic, capitalistic, and neoclassic ideals that argue for nation states to leave the commercial fate of any domestic shipping industry to global labor market forces. Key ideas that emerge from my work on seafarers challenge the idea that globalization is an all-encompassing process only leaving victims in its wake. Whilst resistance to globalization through collective organizing, such as trade unions, may occur, many would then and even now have us believe that these are very isolated and not very impactful occurrences. There's a belief that labor markets, both nationally and globally, are at the mercy of globalizing processes, resulting in an inevitable race to the bottom for workers in terms of their wages and working conditions. However, my work showed the opposite. It showed that in the case of the labor market for seafarers in the Merchant Navy, and in the case of the Philippines, that workers and nation states are not just victims of globalization. They are active agents in how globalization plays out. And this includes the role of nation states. For example, in the case of the Philippines, the state is very much an exporter of global labor, often undercutting labor from other seafaring labor supply countries. Second, I demonstrated that globalization does not automatically mean a race to the lowest wages and most appalling working conditions, as we have come to associate with the new global division of labor and sweatshop work. Instead, the work I did shows that globalization offers possibilities of solidarity amongst workers and organized labor wherever they may be. In the case of merchant Navy seafarers, we see this embodied in the International Transport Workers Federation that facilitates global labor solidarities in the merchant shipping industry. Despite the global nature of the industry, the ITF, through its work with national unions, has maintained relatively stable and high wages and good working conditions for its seafaring membership. It has done this despite shipping capital's attempts to circumvent regulation by flying flags of convenience on their vessels. For the first time, we saw shipping vessels unionized, meaning that whoever was in an ITF-regulated vessel is automatically protected by the ITF, regardless of their individual union membership status. So unions still matter on the global stage as a way of emancipating workers from global exploitation that has become so common in global industries. My work also showed that the state still very much matters. The prevailing idea of research was, however, I demonstrated that this clearly is not the case with my case studies of South Africa, the Philippines, and the United Kingdom. Crafted their own trajectories of globalization in creating, decimating, and shaping seafaring labor markets. Finally, the footloose and fancy-free thesis of global capitalism at the time argued that capital is unfettered and has state and organized labor irrelevant. Yet my work questioned the universality.
Shaun, you are muted.
Okay, I'm back now.
Yes.
This is very much a counter-argument to the end of history thesis that stated that neoliberal globalization had won the day and defeated all resistance. What is more emancipating than to respond with a resounding no? It is here that I wish to acknowledge my Filipino colleagues that have supported my work over the last 2 decades. Thank you to Professor Amante, who hosted me as a visiting scholar at the Seafarer International Research Center at the University of Cardiff during my fieldwork in Wales in the early 2000s. Almost 15 years later, after my University of Cardiff visit, Professor Amante and I would reunite when he chaired my session on seafarers and globalization at the University of the Philippines. Deep gratitude to Dr. Werner Viaja, who is both a colleague and a dear friend and was instrumental in hosting me as a visiting researcher at the Center for Third World Studies at the University of the Philippines in the early 2000s. She also facilitated my 2024 visits to the School of Labor and Industrial Relations as part of the World Expert Lecture Series. This is a picture of Werner and I in 2024, when we met again after many years. And this is a photograph of myself and Professor Amante. Sorry, I just need to share my slides again. Okay, so this is the cover of my book. I spoke about that. This is a picture of Professor Amante and I reunited at the University of the Philippines, where he chaired a panel on my presentation. And that's a picture of the students and I at the end of the talk. And it was really, really engaging and a special moment to be reunited with Professor Amante. And this is Dr. Werner Viaja, who I've known since 1999, who facilitated my first visit to the Philippines and my subsequent visits, and even now in 2024, this is us sitting on the steps of the University of the Philippines. In 2011, I took up an appointment as senior lecturer in the School of Management, IT and Governance at the Westville campus of UKZN. This marked the end of my time as faculty in the program for industrial, organizational, and labor studies. The shift to a new college, campus, and school prompted what would become another thematic focus in my career. That is my work on critical management studies and decolonizing management studies. Whilst critical management studies and decolonizing management studies are distinct concepts, for purposes of this lecture, I use the terms interchangeably. So a number of things happened after I joined the School of Management in 2011, happened in South Africa. In 2012, the Marikana massacre, one of the most significant post-apartheid social upheavals, occurred. In 2015, the Fees Must Fall campaign dominated national and global headlines. Both these events and the silences from management studies scholars about them and what they may possibly mean for research and teaching in management studies would provoke curiosity around the epistemic roots and purposes of management studies. The Fees Must Fall movement, the engagement with what it means to decolonize higher education, was coming primarily from the traditional social science. Management studies scholars was limited or was missing from the national debate on what it means to decolonize higher education. It was during this time that I explored 5 central questions about what it means to be a management studies scholar in a South African and global context. And these questions are now on the screen. The first was, who and for what purpose does management studies exist as an academic discipline? How have the historical roots of the discipline shaped its current form in South Africa and beyond? As a management studies scholar, what are the values we are transmitting to our students around the world? And how do we do decolonial management studies? What is the practice of it, rather than just the theory of it? And what make qualitative methodologies like autoethnography and duoethnography offer to management studies as a form of criticality? I also asked and explored these questions further in my work. In 2014, Dorothy Spiller from New Zealand, exploring some of these questions. We published Critical Pedagogy for Teaching HRM in the Context of Social Change in the African Journal of Business Ethics. Our article explores how CMS, that is critical management studies, and emancipatory education can inform a critical approach to teaching and learning in human resource management education at a tertiary level. The content of the paper is that HRM education, we need to transform the way in which HRM students are educated and assist them to not simply reproduce or regulate relations in the workplace, but to evaluate them and to contribute to justice in space and not just be operational managers. The article ends by asking a more existential question. What does it mean to be human in the context of HRM? Here you can see Dorothy, who's now in New Zealand, and we continue to work together on teaching and learning projects. It was at this point in my work that the late Professor Pillay from UKZN provided me with encouragement, funding, and a series of meaningful conversations about critical management studies. Cribben's crafting of my thinking in this area is me and others in this area. A second significant publication for me was my book chapter, Decolonizing Management Studies, A Love Story, which first appeared in the first edited book of critical management studies in South Africa, which was edited by Professor Jeff Goldman. Here I demonstrated that decolonizing management studies is not simply about changing the content of what we teach, but we also recognize decolonial work as well as cognitive, meaning it's related to the emotions and body. It is an embodied practice that is ultimately an act of love for our students, our discipline, and ourselves. I provided examples of assessment and methodology. I use it in my teaching and learning practices. I put capital into their studies and are epistemic beings rather than being seen as deficits of knowledge. This chapter was the first peer-reviewed published work in South Africa on decolonizing management and organizational knowledge, and has capitalized much of my global and national work in this area. Their work continues to question and critique the epistemic foundation of management studies knowledge, and it's encouraging to see new work in this area. In 2019, based on my published and public intellectual work in this area, I organized along with Alex Faria from Brazil, Nimraji Prasad from India, and Gavin Jack from Australia, the first colloquium hosted in South Africa on decolonizing management and organizational knowledge specifically. The colloquium was sponsored by the Journal Organization and the NRF. It was here that I also got to meet one of my heroes and mentors, Professor Stella Nkomo, whose work on decoloniality, diversity, and whiteness in organizations has inspired much of my own work. Alex, Nimraji, Gavin, and Stella continue to support and inspire me, and to them I say thank you. This is a picture of Stella, Professor Stella Nkomo, and my current postdoctoral mentee, Nuria Cadet, who was also a former PhD student. Work done at the colloquium was published in our special issue of Organ in this area of work. Our co-authored editorial argues that we need a robust, pluriversal discussion on the how and why of decolonization. Yet we show that to date, most business and management schools are on the periphery of debates about decolonizing higher education, even as business schools in diverse locations function as contested sites of neocolonialism and expansion of Western neoliberal perspectives. The book, Management Studies in South Africa, co-authored with Professor Radhamani Suryamurthy from Sociology at UKZN, and published by Palgrave, is the first cohesive attempt to document bibliometrically the knowledge production process in South African management studies. The book, amongst other findings, shows that historically management studies knowledge production was dominated by white Afrikaner males, was almost exclusively quantitative and positivist and pro-managerial in its thematic focus. This is in large part due to South Africa's colonial double bind of British colonialism and subsequent racialized capitalism under apartheid. We show that industrial psychology and management studies were very much complicit with the apartheid state in supporting eugenic arguments about racial superiority. These disciplines provided the scientific legitimacy for the apartheid project. The use of psychometrics, eugenic ideas of which races make better managers, and even which racial groups can be allowed to study MBAs project. The scholarship and practice of HRM and management was racially divided during this time. Professional bodies, as well as universities, were racial gatekeepers as to who can enter certain courses, degrees, and who can work at which level of management. In post-apartheid South Africa, these formal racialized gatekeeping processes disappeared, Yet the different racial demographics of scholars and students in the discipline has not necessarily. The work is still dominated by positivism, though to a much lesser extent, and thematic analysis of the work produced shows that a continued preoccupation with techniques of control and management of dissent. This is even the case when work is produced on more progressive topics, such as employee wellness, diversity, and human relations. Applied and scholarly work in HRM continues to deify productivity. We rest so we have more energy to work. We maintain our health so we can be healthier, income-generating units. We delegate so we can have more time to focus on other work. We believe falsely in the idea of infinite human resourcefulness, the idea that we are never good enough since we always have to train and retrain to achieve excellence, which guess what? We never achieve. We peddle the idea of multitasking to be productive, whilst all our research shows it is the least productive way of working and does not produce what psychologists call a sense of flow. We appropriate ideas from indigenous cultures and people of color, such as yoga, mindfulness, Ubuntu, and even spirituality into the workplace to ensure even greater levels of productivity. This is not to say that one should not be engaged with the work. This is, as I've argued in my more theoretical work, fundamentally anti-human. If it is anti-human, then I contend it is anti-emancipatory. In 2021, at the height of the COVID pandemic, I worked with Dr. Catherine Pillay, a sociologist, and Dr. Christy Leask, a psychologist, to explore some of the ideas of how we can develop more human-centric workplaces. Our paper, Holding Space, Shaping Organizational Empathy Through a Collaborative Auto-Ethnographic Approach, demonstrates how we did this. This work represented a shift towards understanding emancipation at a more micro or psychological level than my previous work that explored the concept at a more structural level. Catherine, Christy, and myself conducted a series of workshops with staff on how to navigate the pandemic with resilience and agility. The sessions were extremely successful and became an opportunity to hold space for those in crisis, whilst also providing a toolkit to navigate the challenges posed by the pandemic. Based on the work we did in those workshops, we explore and develop the concept of organizational empathy and how it shows up in workplaces. We then offered the concept of performative empathy as a form of inauthentic organization. The empirical and theoretical work developed here has since found expression in work done by global coaching firm Cognomy in their guide to resilience training called The Art of Resilience, a short guide to understanding and nurturing our resilience. The applied value I'm proud of. The clientele for this work is global and spearheaded by Dr. Christy Leask. The psychology of resilience amongst women in the workplace was explored by my former PhD student and current postdoctoral mentee, Dr. Nuria Cadet, as we engage with the psychology of work. At the heart of the work on resilience, grit, empathy, care, and compassion is the idea of emancipation. Continuing to play with ideas of what it means to be human in work organizations, Catherine Pillay and myself developed ideas on what it means to engage in an ethics of care and pedagogy of compassion during times of crisis. An ethics of care broadly refers to the priority of relationships, concern, and responsibility for others, as opposed to concern only about utilitarian outcomes, like passing or failing a course, for example. We claim that self-care and care for the other are not mutually exclusive practices during crisis. Developing an ethics of care and pedagogy of compassion is a necessary if underexplored part of the decolonization debate of higher education in South Africa. The decolonization project in South Africa tends to focus on issues of curriculum content higher education access and less on an ethics of care as applied to self and other. We employ collaborative autoethnography as our method to make this contribution. This paper was also important in providing a more holistic way to view my work. I began my career with research that explored structure and agency at a macro and global level. This included macro factors such as globalization, political economy, nation states, and labor markets. The work with Pillay and Leask allowed me to explore agency and power at a micro and psychological level. The work also allowed me to play with qualitative approaches such as auto-collaborative ethnography and geoethnography. These methodological approaches are not popular in South African management studies. That still often considers itself an objective science with no need for the context of self. My contribution methodologically in my career thus far, in this regard, has been to develop the use of these methodologies in management world. The work with Pillay and Leask are examples of this. Additionally, my work with Dr. Lisa Kania during her time as my postdoctoral mentee developed the use of geoethnography as a sense-making exercise published, applying geoethnography to position research identity in management research, published in the South African Journal of Human Resource Management, continues to be one of the most popular methodological works I have co-published and is widely cited both nationally and internationally. In the work, we argue that South African management studies does not have a strong tradition of qualitative, critical, and reflexive research. We explore how this may occur through a reflection on research identity. I continue to work and play with these methodologies as a way of centering the human in our scholarly work. My third area of work is on the sociology of professions. Professions are a special category of occupations. They often enjoy an elite status, are highly specialized, serve a public good, they are generally highly paid compared to broader occupations. They have long periods of training and education that serve as gatekeeping processes. And professions invoke socially central values around social justice, education, and health. However, everywhere since the 1990s, we have seen many of the issues facing broader occupations face those in the professions. There has been a deprofessionalization, a rise in job insecurity, and a steady shift towards the erosion of professional autonomy and algorithmic or artificial intelligence management of professionals. Here too, I draw on ideas of how agency and structure. Historically, the apartheid state's professional project operated as a form of closure based primarily on race, that is to the exclusion of Black South Africans. And by Black, we mean African, Indian, and colored South Africans. And to a lesser extent, gender and its intersections. White, middle-class South Africans enjoyed superior and privileged access to professional education, training, and labor markets. This shaped the profile of the South African professions in very stark and particular ways. First, there are strategies developed by the state, professional bodies, and educational and training institutions to affect racial transformation in the composition of traditional professions. Second, distinguished from these broad measures are specific legislative interventions in the regulation of some professions, with a key theme of access and equity. Third, there's a state-led project of professionalization of public services with the twin goals of racial and gender transformation as a strategy to raise standards of professionalization of new groups. In South Africa, for example, we see the professionalization of security guards as a strategy for credentialing and organizing better working conditions for employees. The themes of transformation, gatekeeping, based on identity, managing post-colonial states through professionalization projects, and exploring the ways in which organizational and professional work cultures act as instruments of inclusion and exclusion resonate with the emancipatory themes of my work on seafarers and critical management studies. With Professor Debbie Bonnen, who is now at the University of Pretoria, we helped formalize the subdiscipline of the sociology of professions in South Africa. In 2013, with the publishing of a special issue on the topic in the South African Review of Sociology, as well as organizing the first colloquium on the sociology of professions to be held in Africa and South Africa in 2017. Since 2013, we are pleased to see contributions to the sociology of professions straddling scholarship in human resources, organizational psychology, management studies, and sociology. Both Debbie and I became active also at the global level by encouraging participation at the ISA from academics from the Global South. My work there and Debbie's continued have seen a democratizing of the work in this area as it moves from a bias towards the global north to being more inclusive of the majority world. My graduated PhD students expanded the epistemic base of the sociology of professions in South Africa to include human resources management. Their work examines the changing nature of professional work in sub-Saharan Africa. They have also examined how professional identity of resilience amongst professionals and how professional work and credentials no longer carry guarantees of class mobility. In producing doctoral research in these areas, we have expanded the empirical and theoretical foundations of the sociology of professions and the psychology of work. Thematically, my three areas of work on seafaring labor markets, critical management studies, and the sociology of professions finds commonality around the idea of emancipatory processes. The question of how we achieve measures of freedom at the structural and psychological level is one central to my career. I continue to be fascinated by the play between structure and agency and the moments they create for dissent emancipatory futures. Finally, as I conclude, I want to thank some wonderful human beings that have shaped so much of my journey as an academic and as a human being. Thank you to all who have come before me. These are my own ancestors, as well as the ancestors of others that have fought, won, lost, struggled, and triumphed against systemic successes are forged in your struggles. You have made my path that much easier to navigate. My maternal and paternal grandparents and their parents who had to endure the horrors of colonialism and apartheid, yet persisted with a love for life. My own parents, Denise and Clint Ruggunan, who have provided stability, support, and abiding grace in supporting me personally and professionally in all I do. My siblings, Wendy and Tracy, for their good humor and ability to make me laugh under the most difficult circumstances. My career spans 21 years, and for each of these years, my life partner, my lighthouse, my best supporter, and my critic, Dr. Julian Dion Ryan, has been by my side. We have created an extraordinary life that has made so much possible. Calvin and Sharina Dion Ryan for always providing a home away from home in Johannesburg. There are far too many friends to mention by name. I started listing them, but I didn't want to get into trouble by leaving anyone out. You know who you are, so thank you. Thank you to all my students, research assistants, past and present, both at UKZN, nationally and abroad. Risha Kara and Preston Govinsamy for their patience and skills in helping me develop my quantitative methodology capacity. Team, Dr. Farah Mongandize passed away this year after a battle with cancer. Thank you, Farah. I dedicate this lecture to you. My colleagues in my discipline school have allowed and encouraged me to pursue my research and teaching unencumbered in a collegial environment. Professor Isabel Martin. Time is our most precious resource. So thank you to everyone today for creating the time to attend. Let us have an emancipated weekend, and thank you once more.
Shaun, please stop sharing.
Good afternoon again, distinguished guests. I want to extend my deepest gratitude to everyone who joined us today, and in particular to Professor Ruggunan. Shaun, our distinguished professor, you have professed. Thank you for your passion. It certainly came through in your lecture this afternoon. Thank you for being a role model for management studies students and for academics. We are truly privileged to have been afforded this window into the rich and deep academic heritage that has helped shape your personal and professional growth and your academic research. We're truly honored to have shared the celebration of this personal milestone today with you and with all of the guests present, particularly with the colleagues formative to your career, as well as with your loved ones, family, and friends. Through your ongoing and pioneering work, we know that you will continue to push boundaries, challenge norms, and pursue emancipation, and in particular, that you continue to inspire greatness at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Everyone, thank you for your presence this afternoon, for your continued support and your encouragement. And to Shaun, Professor Ruggunan, thank you for your commitments. Go well, everyone, and good afternoon.